As we all know, Ratchet & Clank is a video game franchise, my favorite one at that, but that's not the full extent of the franchise's scope. Neither is this video, as I won't be covering action figures, statues, or a variety of other collectible merchandise, but I will be discussing the TV episode, movie, books, comics, and manga. I've mainly discussed the video games in my R&C videos, so you'll get to hear my thoughts on the non-video game R&C media texts for a change. Compared to most of the games, these are rather obscure, so it's a good topic for a hardcore R&C nerd like myself. Some are so obscure in fact that I wouldn't fault a big R&C fan for not knowing about them. Some also have infamous reputations, and it seems only a few of them are actually respected in the fandom. I'm not sure if I'm forgetting some other official R&C media texts, but if I am, please let me know down in the comments. I'll give my honest thoughts on the 8 that I know of, starting with the newest one. Ratchet & Clank Life of Pi. Life of Pi isn't the weirdest R&C media text out there, but its existence definitely is. This TV short was apparently made in 2019, but didn't become public knowledge until 2021, and I use that term lightly. The marketing for this was practically zero, a single user on LinkedIn of all social media platforms making a single post on it, announcing that it exists on a streaming service that can only be accessed in Canada. This wasn't even Sony or Insomniac Games or anyone affiliated with those companies. It's like no one wanted anyone to find it. It's the most bizarre marketing I've seen for an official product, if you can even call it that. The fact that it has over 500,000 views on YouTube baffles me. The episode itself is pretty decent. What sticks out the most is the art and animation, which I guess looks alright for a 3D animated TV episode, but the character models look like plastic, and their animations are a bit stiff. Ratchet in particular looks pretty weird. He also sounds weird, suffering from the same obnoxiousness as he does in Rift Apart, even though it's still James Arnold Taylor voicing him.
All that to procure a pizza?
With 367 toppings, now give me back the control of my ship!
Ratchet.
Then again, his character is quite obnoxious in this episode, being hangry at Clank. I'll give this episode props for featuring more beef between Ratchet and Clank than the movie did though. Clank's pettiness towards Ratchet is honestly fun to watch, and he acts like a total boss throughout the episode. Him, Nefarious, and even Quark are also voiced by their original voice actors, meaning Jim Ward's last appearance as Quark was in one of the most obscure R&C content.
Oh, come on! Just give me another chance! I can be your sassy pizza cow! Moo!
He still did a great job, and Quark eating live pizza ingredients made me chuckle. That's why it's called Life of Pi, by the way, revolving around a dimension called the Pizzaverse.
Can this really be happening? After years of eating pizza, will pizza now eat me?
There are some other funny moments, like Lance and Janice returning.
Oh, Janice!
Oh, Lance! I don't care if you are my best friend's evil twin brother.
Nefarious' Warbot standing in line to punch him. And Clank telling Ratchet,
You suck!
Huh? What?
before using the suck cannon. I didn't expect some of these weapons to show up, nor did I expect the Dynamo of Doom to function like the Bi-Obliterator. There are some other interesting references as well, such as the nuclear-powered rocket sled from Tools of Destruction, Tharpods from All for One, and even Clank's Hollow Knuckles from Secret Agent Clank. They really cut deep with this one. It's a shame that this short follows the movie though, the most cursed timeline, and the comedy is not without its moments of cringe. Otherwise, this episode is a fun watch. I feel like R&C is past the point of good adaptations to TV or the big screen. Speaking of which, Ratchet & Clank the movie. As a kid, I wished for R&C to get its own movie, but I didn't really expect it, so I was shocked when an actual R&C movie got announced in April of 2013. The reveal trailer still makes me smile to this day, with some funny meta-humor involving the animators, though Ratchet does look cursed. Later trailers also looked promising, despite seeming more generic, but back then I wasn't that concerned with quality. When I did watch the movie, however, which was actually some years after it came out, I found it mediocre, which is a shame, because this movie had so much potential. I think this movie could have succeeded if it had either been a mostly unserious, slightly edgy satire like the PS2 games, or a more serious but emotionally resonant dramatic storyline like the Future series, particularly A Crack in Time. Instead, it ended up being the most generic animated movie possible, featuring a basic storyline, flat characters, and shallow comedy. Ratchet wants to become a Galactic Ranger because he has heart, and is an absolutely boring protagonist to follow. Him and Clank have pretty much no conflict, which is part of what made their relationship so engaging and ultimately satisfying in the original game, them eventually setting aside their differences to take down the big bad. Not only that, but given how little Clank contributes to the storyline, the movie might as well have been called Ratchet and Quark instead. Quark gets a lot of screen time, and he can be fun, but his arc is completely rushed. It originally developed over 3 10-hour-long games, so of course it wouldn't work over the course of a mere 90 minutes. As for the other Galactic Rangers, Korra and Brax are nothing characters, but I'll admit Alaris is decent. Chairman Drek gets butchered the most, acting nothing like he did in the original game, has a stupid face, and literally gets turned into a sheep by Dr. Nefarious. Who invited him? As for the comedy, it was mostly unfunny, but I did laugh from one of the Kronkbots screaming, "Wilhelm!" after his friend got hit and did the Wilhelm scream. I don't know, the subversion caught me off guard. Wilhelm! Although this movie isn't a good homage to R&C, it does have some neat references, like Dan Johnson, Steve, Meatloaf Day, and even Up Your Arsenal's multiplayer mode. It also references Sly Cooper, Daxter, and the original PlayStation startup sound. The art and animation isn't impressive compared to Pixar movies, but it does look quite detailed and pleasing to the eye. To no one's surprise, this movie has the same story and character problems as the PS4 game that adapts it, but might have better pacing, and since it's shorter than the game, it has less cringe writing too. Alas, that doesn't stop the writing in this movie from being bad. Like I said, I feel like R&C is past the point of high quality adaptations. The series really should have gotten a movie or TV show within like 2010, when the writing of the games were mostly stable. Rift Apart wasn't too shabby though, so maybe it could work. Life of Pi was onto something. Ratchet and Clank, the movie novel. As its title suggests, this is a novelization of the movie's events, so it's not exactly good. I remember enjoying it, but alas, I wasn't too concerned with quality back in the day. Fun fact, this novel got released 2 months before the game and movie, so I actually spoiled myself, funnily enough. Given that it has no sound or visuals, I had to use my imagination for this one, so I suppose that made it more engaging. Revisiting it now, however, all I see is bad dialogue. Next! Ratchet and Clank, Hero Time. In addition to a movie novel, there's also a visual movie novel called Hero Time, which has less words and more pictures than the novel. Although I'm forced to look at some ugly character models, this might be the best version of the movie storyline, containing way fewer lines, meaning less boredom and cringe. It does, however, make for an even more rushed version of that story, quickly revealing that Nefarious is a former Galactic Ranger who wants revenge for being bullied by Quark, skipping plenty of details, and taking about 15 minutes to read through. It doesn't even address that Nefarious turns Drek into a sheep, and Quark's arc has to be the quickest redemption arc I've ever seen. There's not much else to say that I haven't already, so I'll just move on to the next media text. The Art of Ratchet and Clank. When Naughty Dog got an art book on their 30th anniversary in 2014, I was really hoping Insomniac Games would get their own on theirs, even if that meant 10 years of waiting. That is in just over a year from now though. No matter, because we got an art book of Ratchet and Clank on its 15th anniversary, which means that all is right with the world. This might be a weird one to include, given that it's about the development behind the R&C games rather than the story about the Ratchet and Clank characters. But then again, some of the games feature that in Insomniac museums. It covers a 15-year-long history of 11 Insomniac-developed R&C games, from the original game to the game based on the movie based on the original game. This book contains over 200 pages of cool concept art that give insight into the production of the games, from characters to weapons and environments. Not all of it concerns R&C, as Insomniac was initially developing other ideas like Girl with a Stick and Monster Knight, but dropped the former for being boring, and the latter for wanting to step away from making platformer games like Spyro. I found that information online instead of in this book, which is a gripe I have with it. It's nice that it lets much of the artwork speak for itself, but textual information is sometimes lacking. In its defense, it is called the Art of Ratchet Clank, but I would have liked more behind the scenes fun facts. In any case, this is a gorgeous art book that I can recommend to any hardcore R&C fan. That is unless you'll become depressed like me upon realizing some awesome ideas were cut. Like the civilization built on top of a gigantic skeleton, and a society where Kragmites hold Lombax as prisoners. Insomniac is known for bringing back cut ideas eventually though, so there may still be a chance. Ratchet & Clank DC Comics. Switching to a different kind of book, the Ratchet & Clank comics were published by DC and bridged the gap between A Crack in Time and All for One. Despite being tied to one of the least respected games in the series, these comics are still probably the most respected supplemental material among the R&C fandom, and I can see why. These comics tell an engaging story across 6 issues that has some fun humor. What's more, they feature some characters fans wanted to see more of, like Talwyn, Kronk and Zephyr, and even Sasha. Even her father, Big Al, and some Galactic Rangers are involved. And although they don't have big roles, it was nice seeing them again too. I'm also glad Azimuth is mentioned. Ratchet still mourning his death, which he should, given how impactful it was. This comic even takes Ratchet & Clank back to Veldin, where it all started, and it was interesting to see an expansion of it. I used to think there were no citizens there, let alone a galaxy burger. The more you know. This comic doesn't stay in Solana, however, as Ratchet & Clank are taken to a completely new galaxy, made by this story's main villain, Artemis Sog. This guy isn't one of my favorite R&C villains, but I quite like how he's related to Captain Quark of all people winning the Polaris election. It explains how that even happened, Quark being Sog's spokesperson, but becoming his own spokesperson after being influenced by a guy who wanted to do a little trolling. It's understandable then that Sog would be pissed off and want to make his own galaxy so that he could become president anyway. What a doof move. He kidnaps some iconic R&C planets by the way, like Kurwan, Umbris and Aranos, which is a nice way to mention them. This comic is clearly where TJ Fixman could bring back elements from the PS2 games like he always wanted, and I wish that would have been the case for the PS3 games too. I gotta say, I'm a bit tired from being stuck in the Polaris galaxy for 15 years. I said that the humor is fun, and that's mainly due to Ratchet being snarky and sarcastic at almost every turn. It might sound like Sly Cooper in Sly 4, who just can't take anything seriously, but Ratchet does turn serious whenever appropriate, like when he thinks Talwyn died in an explosion. Of course, she didn't, but it was a moving moment nonetheless. Quark is funny as usual too, and it's actually he who saves the day in the end, despite being taped up. In the end, Sog is sent to a different dimension, namely 8266, which is apparently where Tachyon resides. I love that the ending scene has them bicker over who's the ruler of a small moon. The DC R&C comics easily make up the best non-video game R&C content. I don't consider them amazing, but they're well written and fun to read. The art and paneling are mostly pleasing to the eye, and the covers look pretty sick. The Adventures of Captain Starshield. The DC comics aren't the only R&C comics to exist. There's also an older and much shorter comic about the adventures of Captain Starshield, which actually released a week before Deadlocked was out, and serves as a small prequel to that game. Instead of being 6 full volumes, it's only 6 pages, and shows Captain Starshield fighting some aliens after crash landing, before setting a course for the Shadow Sector, where the game show Dread Zone is held. We know that he immediately dies in Deadlocked, but this comic shows how skilled of a fighter he was, stopping a massive space station from destroying a planet, and cleverly using the environment to defeat some aliens. It has striking art, with some awesome creature designs, and a tone that's reminiscent of Deadlocked. Curiously, some of the aliens he fights are called Kragmites, with a K instead of a C, so they're not exactly the Kragmites from Tools of Destruction, but that's probably their namesake. Given its length, that's all there really is to say about this comic, but it's cool, and I wish there were more R&C comics like this. Ratchet & Clank Bang Bang Bang, Critical Danger of the Galaxy Legend. Finally, there's the R&C manga, which is by far the weirdest official R&C content to exist. I mean, just look at its name. Bang Bang Bang, Critical Danger of the Galaxy Legend, it's unabashedly Japanese, and so is the art. Ratchet having those thick eyebrows that he actually has in the Japanese version of some of the games. I also love how Clank looks. He's even more of a funny little guy in this one. In general, the facial expressions are some of the wackiest I've ever seen. So, how's the content? Well... yeah, that's right. We got Clank's antenna penetrating Ratchet's arsenal. Additionally, Ratchet strips, twerks, farts, pees, tries to eat Clank, a Sharkigator, and a menu, and he constantly has snot running down his nose. He's also an actual terrorist. Clank also partakes in terrorism, cries liquid, obsesses over boobs, throws poo at Ratchet, plasma whips Courtney Gears, and nearly commits suicide. Quark rips his pants, also farts, uses a bird as a GPS, and is willing to give $1 to whoever finds the most important thing to him. They're the biggest dumbasses I've ever seen, making the dumbest jokes I've ever seen, and they successfully make me die of laughter. For some reason, there are 1,000 Clanks, and also for some reason, they immediately vanish. I like how Ratchet later questions the existence of another Clank after having seen that. I also like how Ratchet and Clank are recognized as heroes even though they're terrorists who only make things worse. This manga actually offers a different origin story to how Ratchet and Clank met, and if you thought the relationship in the original game was bad, then this'll make you faint. Instead of Clank crash landing on Veldin, Ratchet nearly crash lands on Megapolis, using his Devastator to clear debris, which happens to bury Clank from his shoulders down. Ratchet doesn't even want to help him at first, and eventually uses his Devastator to get him out. He then uses Clank's antenna to clean various parts of his own body, leading to the super cursed panel. Still a better origin story than the movie. Unfortunately, I've only ever found an English translation of the first volume, so I've only read half of the manga, which is a shame because I love it. Yes, it's disgusting and silly, but that makes it so funny to me, seeing these characters I'm so familiar with being used like this. While it's not the best non-video game R&C media text, it's definitely my favorite. It's a guilty pleasure to be sure. Apparently, Ratchet and Clank actually marry each other in the second volume. To think we live in a timeline where this is official R&C content, I mean, what are the odds?
But suppose you throw a coin enough times. Suppose one day, it lands on its edge.
Now that I've gone over these non-video game R&C media texts, it dawns on me that they aren't of very high quality. They range from pretty good to pretty bad, although I do love one of the bad ones. Life of Pi shows potential, but I unfortunately think R&C is past the point of getting high quality adaptations. If we do get more R&C media texts, which is highly likely with the franchise's recent resurgence, hopefully the quality will be more like the comics than the movie and its books. I'm Arcadon, and hopefully you'll see me next time!